Good day, students. Welcome to Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO candidates. My name is Daniel Arowarade. I'll be teaching you literature, and today we want to look at a very interesting African poem, Not My Business by Niyi Osundare.
Eko Learners Support, a support program of the Lagos State Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education for WAEC and NECO candidates.
At the end of this lesson, you will be able to explain the themes of the poem, explain the meaning of the poem itself, and explain how poetic devices have been used to advance the meaning of the poem. Let's look at the poem itself. They picked Akoni up one morning, beat him soft like clay, and stuffed him down the belly of a waiting jeep. What business of mine is it? So long they don't take the yam from my sovereign mouth. They came one night, booted the whole house awake, and dragged Danladi out, then off to a lengthy absence. What business of mine is it, so long they don't take the yam from my sovereign mouth? Chinwe went to work one day, only to find her job was gone. No query, no warning, no probe. Just one neat sack for a stainless record. What business of mine is it? So far, they don't take the yam from my sovereign mouth. And then one evening, as I sat down to eat my yam, a knock on the door froze my hungry hand. The jeep was waiting on my bewildered lawn. Waiting in its usual silence. What a poem. Let's look at the brief background of this poem. The Nigerian poet Niyi Osundare wrote Not My Business in resistance to the brutal dictator General Sani Abacha, who reigned from 1993 to 1998, and his rule saw multiple cases of human rights abuse. The poem is a combination of separate short stories, including the poets. With these stories, he explains the brutality of the military regime, which has no respect for humanity, fairly integrating three different major Nigerian tribes and directly campaigning for ethnic tolerance. The poet shows us various forms of these inhuman treatments. So this poem is a narrative poem. But how narrative is it? So narrative that it has 4 different stories in it, all unconnected, except for the themes that they express. We first saw the story of Akoni, who was smuggled one night and was beaten seriously. Akoni represents an aspect of the regime, the military regime at that time when the poet wrote. And it talks about battery and physical abuse and suppression, which was very common to the military regime at that time. Don't forget that we have established a brief background to this poem. And there's a reference to the military rule at the time Niyi Osundare wrote this poem. The first, like I said, is Akoni, he was beaten, taken away. And we have in the second stanza, who is Danladi. Danladi faces a similar situation as Akoni. But the issue with Danladi, of course, an Hausa person, was that he was taken away into a lengthy absence. This is quite similar to that of Akoni, who was stuffed down the belly of a waiting jeep. That's a metaphor. Anyway, the belly there means probably the boot of the jeep. You know, that's where they keep criminals. If you have watched some movies, probably some action movies, where some people are smuggled out and the driver or the abductors do not want to be caught by the police. They keep whatever it is or whoever it is they have carried in the boots because they are not so likely to be checked. And this brings us to the third victim of human rights violation that was prevalent during this military regime. We have another Chinwe. Chinwe got to work one day and discovers that she has been sacked without queries, without warnings, without probes, according to the poet. And this is so inhuman because Chinwe is innocent. She has not done anything. And how do we know this? She has a stainless record, according to the poet. But it was a neat sack. What an oxymoron. The sack was neat. Not neat because it was proper and true, but it was neat because there was no prior information. It was so sudden. And this really affects Chinwe because now she is deprived of her civil rights and she cannot even go to work. She cannot even survive anymore. Probably she will just join the unemployed class and start all over. And now we have the fourth stanza where the poet persona himself was the victim. He was sitting in the night and trying to eat his usual yam. The yam he had always eaten and focused on, even when those evils had been going on. When Danladi was arrested, when Akoni was taken suddenly, when Chinwe was sacked, the poet persona kept saying, "It was not my business. It is not my business. So far, or so long, they don't take away my sovereign yam, my yam from my sovereign mouth." That's to tell you that he has never paid attention to the things that happens in the political space. He doesn't care. So far, he's unaffected. But now, the poet himself has become a victim. They have invaded his privacy. They knock on the door, froze his hungry hand. Well, there's a synecdoche here. We're going to look at it later. The poet himself becomes a victim. Let's look at some of the themes that this poet advances. Number one, we have that of tyranny. The theme of tyranny. The poem talks about the dictatorial tendencies under the military rule in Nigeria, especially in the 80s. We have, of course, the cases of abduction. We had 2 instances. And then we also have loss of livelihood or even death. Apart from the kidnap, we heard that Danladi was taken away into a lengthy absence. That could mean imprisonment or could even mean death. Probably they had killed him or thrown him somewhere. No one can even find him anywhere. We have loss of livelihood. For Chinwe, the only means of livelihood for her had been taken away suddenly because no one can question the government. No one can question the regime. it's a dictator regime. It's a dictator government. And that's an expression of tyranny. And now, of course, we have another, which is citizenship negligence and its consequence. Citizenship negligence and its consequence. When citizens display political apathy, the poet tries to show that they are not doing the right thing. When citizens say, it's not my business, whatever happens in the government, the poet tries to show that it's a wrong approach. It's a wrong approach to anything that the government has done, whether dictatorial or democratic. So he's calling upon us to get involved, to make the country's matter and the country's business our priorities. We should try to be involved. If you need to vote, go and vote. If you need to, sing the national anthem, sing it with pride. If you need to fight for your country, fight for your country. Be patriotic. Be involved. That's what he's saying here, that we should not just neglect. The reason is that indirectly or someday directly, we are also affected by every government that you are in. So, let's look at some of the devices and figures of speech that has been used by the poet. First, I want us to look at language. The diction is simple and can be understood by an average reader. Very simple. Uses words like one night, a knock on my door. Those are words that you can relate with. Except for a few symbols and metaphors that he uses. For instance, the issue of yam. Yam represents food generally, not just about yam. Somebody will ask if the poet persona does not eat any other thing apart from yam. No. Yam only means your own personal interest, what you love doing, your own work, facing your own duty or business. And then we have the mood and the tone. The mood of the poet is that of fear and uncertainty, while the tone is satirical. We can observe that the poet is trying to create the way, a picture out of the way people behave when things go on in the country. Some will say, it's not my business. So far, I am safe. Until they become a victim. And it tries to bring a satire. I'm sure we know what a satire is. A satire is a piece of literature, a piece of work that tries to condemn the ills of the society and tries to prefer a solution to them. Now, this poem is also a satirical poem, mimicking and mocking people's reaction to country matters. So, his tone is satirical, or probably sarcastic, if you might say. And we see, of course, the mood, that of uncertainty. We don't know what to expect. People are being kidnapped every day. People are being beaten, suddenly taken away, and we can't even hear anything from them any longer. It projects so much fear, and we don't know what to expect next under an oppressive military regime. Now, we have the use of simile. This is an indirect comparison which uses as and like. Okay, an example is that they beat him soft like clay. Of course, Akoni was beaten seriously. The Yoruba man, seriously. And when they beat him soft like clay, they are trying to mold him, beat him into the understanding and the acceptance of their own ideas. You know what we do with clay? Clay is more or less a symbol. The clay is always found in the hands of the potter. And before the potter molds something out of a clay, he first breaks it down, makes it very soft, and then molds it into whatever he wants. So to beat him soft like clay is a reference to what is done to clays. The government wants you to believe something about them. They want you to accept an ideology, and they start out by oppressing the individual. Those are characteristics of the military rule and military regime. And then we have metaphor. We have something like down the belly of a waiting jeep. The belly there is more or less the boot, like I expressed, or probably any space inside the car. Then we have the use of personification. This is when the attributes of a living thing is given to a non-living thing. Examples in the poem are the waiting jeep. Well, only a human being can wait, but this attribute has been given to a lifeless object, the jeep. And then we also have the personification of belly, down the belly. Then you also have, of course, you know that only human beings can possess belly or something that is living, like animals and humans. And then that same word was used for the jeep, as though the jeep is human. Then we also have the whole house awake. The whole house awake. Well, not necessarily the house. Well, this could also serve as a synecdoche, because a larger part of something has been used to represent the smaller part. People live in a house, but he says the whole house awake. The house itself cannot wake up. The house itself does not have the ability to even sleep in the first place. So this is a personification. And then we also have bewildered lawn. The jeep waiting to take the poet persona is there in a bewildered lawn. The word bewildered means surprised, confused, perplexed, or disturbed and uncertain about what is going to happen next. Is curious. What is going on? And when he sees the jeep, that is the emotions that happens or that comes to his heart or his mind. But now these emotions have been transferred to the lawn where the jeep has been parked. So even though the lawn cannot be bewildered, the poet says it's a bewildered lawn. This is a personification. The lawn has been personified. Okay. We have other ones like euphemism. And of course, you know that euphemism is saying unpleasant things in a pleasant and presentable way or manner. For example, they said, for Danladi, they took him off to a lengthy absence. This is a way of saying he was imprisoned for probably life imprisonment or death. And then we also have an oxymoron, neat sack. A person is sacked. That's not good to hear. But a person says neat. Neat is contradictory to the word sacked. And so placing two contradictory words side by side is an oxymoron. Paradox. He said just one neat sack for a stainless record. That's absurd. I think people who have a stainless record should be presented with an award, not a sudden sack letter. But we understand what he's saying here. The realities of the military rule. And then we have synecdoche, my hungry hand. Well, it's not the hand that is hungry now, but the poet persona himself. But all of those attributes have been submerged into just the hand, using the hand to represent the whole of the poet or his body. Now, we also have repetitions like jeep, yam. Do not forget that there was a repeated use of, so far they do not take away my yam from my sovereign mouth. So that repetition helps us to understand what the thematic preoccupation of the poem is. The poet is so concerned about people's negligence to country matters. And then, of course, we also have the use of rhetorical question. What business of mine is it? That also makes up a refrain because it looks like a continuous question at the end of each stanza, except for the last stanza, that shows the consequences of neglecting country matters. All right, now it's important to look at the structure of the poem. The poem comprises 4 stanzas. Each stanza makes a statement followed by the speaker's reaction. The speaker reacts after seeing everything that happens to Danladi, to Akoni, to Chinwe, the Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa man. He's still not concerned about what has happened to them. So he responds with that refrain all the time to the situation of the victims. There is no rhyme scheme. The poem's power lies in the use of repetition, especially the line, "from my sovereign mouth," which forms a refrain or an anaphora, and the rhetorical questions that are only answered in the last stanza. There's no regular rhyme pattern. It's a free verse. So look at this question. The poem, Not My Business, is an example of a satire discourse. This is a question I would love you to practice on your own, but I would love to give you a pattern for answering these questions. First, I expect you to identify the themes that can be found This has been discussed. Then, I expect that you bring out instances of satire. First, you have the use of repetition not my business, or what business of mine is it? And of course, we have the second one, which is the reality of the poet himself. That is the last stanza. And it said, a knock on the door froze my hungry end. After talking about the poem a little bit, and of course you are going to introduce the premise of the poem, telling us those things that has happened to different victims in that regime, criticizing and talking about the painful torture people go through during that period of time or that military era. Then you move ahead to tell us the repetition that the poet persona uses to show the negligence of people about country matters. And then, of course, another example, another point is how the poet himself is being affected. So after mentioning those three, then you give a conclusion and you have answered the question. All right. So this brings us to the end of this class. If you have questions, comments, observations, you can reach us on our social media handle displayed on the screen. Thank you very much.
Acing your WAEC and NECO examinations has been made easy by the Lagos State Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education with the Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO Candidates television program. Join seasoned teachers as they take you through these core subjects: targeting the exact syllabus of WAEC and NECO. Watch Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO candidates through these social media platforms to access more educational content and give their feedback. Eko Learners Support for WAEC and NECO candidates. Pass your examinations with flying colors.